Okay, now, good morning, everybody. Today is, Sunday, Menachem, Toshim Pei. Now, we're learning Tanya, with Hashem's help. And last week, we learned a whole lot. I learned a lot. In the beginning of Perek Yud Dalet, the whole page. We learned until 4 lines from the bottom, right? The last line. Ani eineni reitz Elias sheita kamayu lichbere emes. I don't want to be such a fool to deny the truth. And in the class I gave you last week, I made a point of not going into the details of this page. I just read the page and translated it, and I focused on one thought. Midas ha-beinani and midas kolodam, as opposed to madregas ha-beinani. Or to use the language of the beginning of the Tanya, and I'm a little bit tonguing and cheeking it. I don't mean it 100%, but in Higoyin, in Limud, it's a oizgehalten comparison. In Perek Kalef, the Alter Rebbe says there's Shema Mushal and Shema Toyer. There are words that people use in a borrowed way, and there's words that people use in a descriptive way, where the word says something as opposed to representing something. Right? So when you call a little yingele, a little meidele, a tzaddik, or a tzaddikis, it's a Shema Mushal. When you call a yid, that hargei betainis, who killed his Yetzer Hara, a tzaddik, that's Shema Toyer. If you call a person who most of his actions are good, and less than half of his actions are not good, and you call him a tzaddik, that's called Shem HaMushal. Correct? On the other hand, you're talking about a Beinani. He has a Yetzer Hara, never did an Aveira. If you describe such a person as a Beinani, that's a Shem HaToyar, right? Muhus Madregas HaBeinani, which in Perek Yud Beis was called Madrega. Midas ha-beinani compared to madregas ha-beinani is like Shema Mushal versus Shema Toyer. It's not exactly the same, because the Shema Mushal of Perek Aleph is halacha. A beinani means half of a person's actions are sins. It's a beinani, half, 50-50. 50-50. In Perek Yud Dalet, the Alter Rebbe is not talking about 50-50. He's talking about chaleisa b'chol shah. Define your life by 60 seconds. Define your life by 1 minute. And then by another minute, and then a minute after that, and then a minute after that, and one more minute after that, and so forth. Veistach, the Rebbe once mentioned this, Veistach. Ha'ovar, what's Lashon? Whatever, ha'ovar, whatever. Ha'ovar is ovar, ha'osid, ayin, v'ha'hoive kiheref ayin. It's a blink of an eye. If you reduce your life to a series of heref ayins, you can be a beinani 1 minute at a time. It's called midas ha-beinani. And the Alter Rebbe says midas kol adam, v'acharei kol adam yimshech. Because even though kikarev elecha davar me'ed b'fircha v'avchal ha'seisei was told to us, to all Jews, at all generations, Alter Rebbe says the Fedish in Tanya. Right, Teira he nitzchias, Teira achas l'kolana. Alter Rebbe says, Teira achas l'kolana means that kikarev elecha davar me'ed b'fircha or b'avchal ha'seisei was said l'kulana. But upon him, evidently that it's not so simple. So although in Perek Yud Beis, the Alter Rebbe talked about the ideal Beinani, the Shem HaToyer of Beinani, Madregas HaBeinani, which we have coined the capsule is Melucho Memshala, and I'm not going to tell you what they mean. Okay, we've done it so many times that but in Perek Yud Dalet, we're talking a relatively Shem HaMushal Beinani. A person doesn't do any Averis. But not because of Muhus Madregosai, not because of his Avodah Pnimius, but because he lives every minute. And he doesn't do Avedis Bepeil. He doesn't miss opportunities to mitzvahs Bepeil. So he's a Beinani in the minute. He's a Beinani in what's called Midas HaBeinani. So we read a whole page. A whole page. From the second line from the top of the page, the beginning of the Perek, until 4 lines from the bottom of the page. And I can't hear you. This is a question that every bocher asks his mashpia. If his mashpia is honest about how he reads the beginning of Perek Yud Dalet, I cannot remember my teachers putting me in the position where I was able to ask that question. The teretz is that the Alter Rebbe means this also. Midas ha-beinani is seif kol seif beinani. Yeah, it's not madregas ha-beinani. In other words, relatively speaking, he's a beinani in Asiya, even though he's not a beinani in his mahus, in his madrege. Ich habe gelernt nach dem Rambam. Ich lerne Perek Echad Layem mit Rambam. Steht der Rambam also. Als alle seinen Chuy von Talmud Torah. Reiche, mit Orme, mit Gesunde, mit Kranke. Sie geht auf Gemorres. Die Gemorre sagt, dass sie gewinnen Hillel und sie gewinnen Rabbi Paltiel ben Chasma. Hillel gewinnt sehr arm. Sehr arm. Und ich hatte was es. Rabbi Paltiel ben Chasma gewinnt sehr, sehr reich. Und die Gemorre sagt, Hillel mechayev es hoaniyim, Rabbi Paltiel ben Chasma mechayev es hoashirim. Bei Hillel kann lernen Terek, und jeder auch nicht lernen Terek. Also, ihr seid mechayev, was sehr viel Jidenes. Larich ist ja schon Gesundheit. It's a schus. It's been a schus for the last 25 years. It still is. Anyway, it's more than 25 years, yeah? I'm teaching since Gimel Tammuz exactly. We started right away. I think a week after Gimel Tammuz we started. We started Gimel Tammuz. It's Ariela's credit. That means I'm teaching it 26 years. Okay. So we're going to go over. We're starting from the beginning of the Perek. Perek Yudalet. But my intention now, in contrast to last week, where I made it my business to continuously focus on the primary idea, which is the word midah. And we're not talking about what's going on inside, what you feel and what you're holding and what your davening is. We're talking about this 60 seconds. So now we're going to reread it, and we're going to examine the nuance. There's a lot of pratim that the Alter Rebbe says, and some of them are quite scholarly, and how much scholarship we're going to explore, we'll see. But we're going to at least touch on a number of points that are found in this page that we went over last week quite quickly, and now we're going to explore them with a little bit more attention, with a finer eye. Okay, so here we go. Perek Yudalet, from the beginning, V'hinei. Midas ha-beinani and midas kol. The measure of the beinani is the measure of all people. And I suppose, the question that really should be asked, do I have to do tshuva first? One of the questions, could a person be a beinani if he has an aveda, if he hasn't done tshuva first? So in a number of places of Tanya, it says, Beferish, Perek Yud, you can't be a beinani unless you do tshuva for the avedas that you did in your past. But l'cha'ira, that means a beinani in madrege. A beinani in midah is b'chalei b'chal shah, today, now. But it's a question. Okay? And all people should be drawn after this derech. It would be nice if it would be grois chasidim. It would be nice. It really would be nice. But this, anybody can do it. Shekol Adam, any person, Yochali is beinani, is free to be a beinani b'chalei b'chal shah for this moment and for this hour. Why? Ki, the teretz is, ha-beinani einei meyis berah. Shu davar ha-masal aleif. Stop. The beinani condition on the level of midah has nothing to do with how you feel. That's how you read it. It has nothing to do with how you feel. It only has to do with how you act. Tzadikim is ava v'yireh. Madreges ha-beinani is melucha memshala. That means during davening he has to feel. Midas ha-beinani is eini masal alev. Nobody is concerning themselves. The Eibishter Kvayochel is not concerning himself with your heart. The only measure, the only issue that's of significance is action, right? Ki ha-beinani eini meyes berat. To be a beinani, you do not need to be disgusted by evil. Shezeh davar ha-masal alev, which is given over to the heart, which is madregas tzadik. Now, pause, parenthesis. In Perek Yud Beis we said that madregas ha-beinani is on this level during davening. When he davens, he's like a tzaddik. But we're not talking madregas ha-beinani. We're talking midas ha-beinani. And midas ha-beinani doesn't have to have that at all. That's l'chayr davart. V'lei kol itim Shabbos. Like Shabbos, an American is, you're not always in the mood. V'lei kol itim Shabbos. Not all times are the same. Right? So, pnimis in yonim and apikabola sevek ayidim. I don't know exactly when he passed away. Zion Menachem. His name was Yosef Yisrael, I think. Yisrael Yosef Zalmanov. They had him at Kfar Chabad. He was a Shmuel Zalmanov Zazun. I don't remember Shmuel Zalmanov. Shmuel Zalmanov left America before I was born. But my father would talk to me, even as a child. When he would talk about the Shmuel Zalmanov, it was like an immortal. The Shmuel Zalmanov apparently was Matsuyan. oise gewöhnlich. He was a very special person. And he had one son, Yossi, Yisrael, Yosef. Zal was very close to the Rebbe. I don't know his whole life history. I was in the mikveh, I met Reichik. Shmuel David Reichik was much younger than Shmuel Zalmanov. And Shmuel David Reichik was Shmuel Zalmanov's uncle. Herstamaise. You hear what I'm telling you? Rabbi Reichik was Shmuel Zalmanov's uncle, and he got married 13 or 14 years after him. No, 20 years after him. How does that happen? So when I in Europe, he was married a few times. Between his oldest child and his younger child was 36 years. So Rebbe Sen Reichik, Allah Shalom, the Rebbe used to tell Label, every time he said Mrs., the Rebbe would say Rebbetzin, was the youngest daughter from the patriarch. Reb Shmuel Zalmanov was an Edim of one of the older brothers, verstehst? So Shmuel Zalmanov made Rabbi Reichik Shidduch, and Rabbi Reichik was his uncle. So I met Loza Reichik to figure out the generations. It's an entanglement. It's a special job to work it all out. I met him in the mikvah. I saw about your cousin. I don't know what you want to call him. An uncle, a cousin, a second cousin. His father was his cousin. He had a very special. He was a Metzuyin de Kerid. He had a special relationship with the Rabbeim. But I didn't know much about him. I asked around because Shmuel Zalmanov was something very special. But there's one thing which is bepirsum, and I'm mentioning it because you're not going to hear this from anybody else. Nobody else is crazy. Nobody even notices these things. Ich hab mich gegessen. And I'm mentioning it as chusei le'ilin nishmasei. They printed a sefer 25 years ago, more, that's called Yemei Bereishis. It came out before Gimel Tammuz. Yemei Bereishis is a volume on the period leading up to the Frierdiker Rebbe's Petire, Histalkus, through that year until Yud Shvat, the following year, when Rebbe's Makabel Dinasiyas, and then it goes a little bit further. It was made by Yosker Greenberg. He's a shliach in Alaska. It's a really well-researched book. He put in hundreds of hours, probably thousands of hours. It's it's a good sefer. The chkire was done correctly. It wasn't just, I heard a story. He went back to the sources and he found newspaper articles. It's very, very well done. In this sefer, there's a ksav yad from this Yisrael Yosef Zalmanov of a yechidus that he had by the Rebbe, I think in Cheshvan Tafshin Yud Aleph. It's printed in the sefer. I don't know how he got his hands on it, and I think they later printed it in Teres Menachem. I'm not even sure, but who would? It's a yechidus from before the Rebbe was officially Rebbe even. You understand? And I came across it. I read it. So I was geleit. I didn't skip it. I wasn't bored by it. I was geleit. And I'm sharing it with you. I'm really sharing it with you. Well, Ayid is avek. Davon the mannen. It's a good zach. Adamant. But the word is negia a little bit to hear. He asked the Rebbe. He was before Bar Mitzvah. He was before Bar Mitzvah. He was around Bar Mitzvah. He was born Tafresh Tzadik Tes. This is Yud Aleph. He was 12. Tzadik Tes till Yud Aleph is 12, right? Am I correct? He asked the Rebbe, how come in his Avedas Hashem there's moods? Moods. Amol daven sich besser, amol daven sich nicht so geschmack. Sometimes he davens better, sometimes it's so good. Now, if you ask me that question, I would say, you know why? It's called Yetzer Hara. Push it to press. The Rebbe told him, Bazeh Aloshin, you can see it inside. Weil lemeile seine Doshinuyim, bemeile seine Dolomatashinuyim. The Rebbe gave him, the Rebbe was speaking to him, and I put him, the Rebbe knew mit Vemen Hatzutanim, and the Rebbe doesn't, that the Rebbe's a maven doesn't need our Mavinus. He was a 12-year-old boy. The Rebbe says to him, L'mayla d'shinuyim. In other words, the Eibishter's relationship with us, mitzad esarusa de leyela. So the Eibishter alone has shinuyim. And since L'mayla shinuyim is, in other words, sometimes why one day you daven better and one day you daven worse is not because of how much you slept and not because of how much you ate and not because of how much you were machavin, not because of other things that may have come into play. Push it because the connection between you and the Eibishter fluctuates milmayla. You know, we're coming now, it's already Baruch Hashem, 10 days since Tisha B'Av. The 9 days, today's Yud Tes, today is Yud Tes, huh? Today's Yud Tes. So we're getting further and further away. Al Pi Kabbalah, and I'm sure by big tzaddikim they're margish it, in the 9 days, in the 3 weeks, there's Avelos Lamaylo.
It feels terrible.
So I hate it. Yeah, but I don't feel the Ruchnias, I just feel, I don't know what I feel.
Affected.
Tzaddikim feel Silach HaMoichin Poshet. The tzaddik separates from us not because he can learn another plat Gemara, because there's a Ruach HaKedesh Sheira Olav. And by Yankov Avinu it says, by Moshe Rabbeinu it says that in the times of Avelus, the Ruach HaKodesh went away. And when the Avelus passed and the Simcha returned, Vayidaber Adeshem Elai Leimeir, says Rashi, Pasku Meisei Midbar, the Meisei Midbar died, and the Eibush was Meyachet Shmei Alav. Until then, Hashem said to Moshe Rabbeinu, Vayomer, and not Vayidaber. Moshe Rabbeinu felt for 38 years the fact that Yidden were being punished. He felt it in his Ruach HaKodesh. And by Yankov Avinu, from the time Yosef HaTzadik disappeared, until they told him the words, Oy Yosef Chai, Vatchi Ruach Yankov Avim, Zok Rashi, Shar Salav Ruach HaKodesh. So by Tzadikim, this is a real thing. The Rebbe told to a 12-year-old. In other words, the Rebbe felt, the Rebbe knew that this boy, Haltba Zazach. And Haltba, that's a very interesting thing. That sometimes you say, why today, it's nicht gedaven wie nechten, das to wissen, das mit Nebischen. It's not about you, it's about the Eibishter. So the Rebbe says, Loi kol itim shavis. But to Midas HaBeinani has nothing to do. See, that's the word. If you're talking about Davar HaMosel Leiv, Loi kol itim shavis, the hours are not the same. And when you say hours are not the same, Ma, you want to come in here? We need a Tanya? When you're talking about emotions, it's not only how you feel. It's called Eis Ratzon, right? V'nisef ilasi. Every morning when we daven, we say V'nisef ilasi l'cha Hashem Eis Ratzon. And when we daven mincha, we don't say l'cha Hashem Eis Ratzon because it's not an Eis Ratzon. It's an Eis of Shikrus, like it says, except Shabbos. That's why Shabbos, after you finish Kaddish, before we even say you say V'nisef Eis Ratzon. So Loikol Itim Shabbos says the Alter Rebbe, but Loikol Itim Shabbos has to do with Davar HaMasal Leiv. You're talking about emotions, talking about Avayireh, you're talking about spiritual connectedness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. L'mayla is Dashinuyim. U'b'meila is Lamata is Dashinuyim. Says the Rebbe, but when you're talking about Midas HaBeinani, there's no Davar HaMasal Leiv. Madrigas HaBeinani does have Davar HaMasal Leiv, like we learned in Perikut Beis. Zmanei Tefillah, Itei Tefillah, Melech, but Midas HaBeinani is not about that. It's just about weiter. El sur meirav asei teif. The Midas HaBeinani is defined strictly and entirely and absolutely by staying away from evil and doing good. And the Alter Rebbe teaches the hainu bepoil mamish. It means only action, only what one does actionably. B'maisen an action, dibur in a speech, umachshav in a thought. Says the Rebbe, since Midas HaBeinani is not at all about Davar HaMasal Leiv, as opposed to Tzaddik, and even about Madregas HaBeinani, so therefore it's Midas Kol Adam. Why? It's right now. It's this minute. Shebehem, when it comes to Maisa, Divir, Machshava, Habachira, Vayecheles, Vareshus, 3 expressions. The choice and the freedom. The Reshus means permission, right? The Reshus means possibility. I'm going to translate Yecholes as possibility and the Reshus as freedom. The Rambam uses the Lashon. When the Rambam has 2 parakim in Hilchas Tshuva, where he talks about free will. And the Rambam begins that Perek with the words Reshus l'chol adam nesuna. And throughout the Perek, he uses the word Reshus. I'm just looking in a footnote over here. I'm not a god. The Rambam's word for freedom is Reshus. It's been allowed. You're free to do as you wish. Yecholes means possibility. Possibility. You can't, the Rebbe said once, "Me can springen von Dach, springen auf von Dach kann man nicht." Yecholes means a possibility. And of course, Bechira means that the choice is really free. Whatever really free means, we're not going to go into. But the bottom line is, since Midas HaBeinani is not about Davar HaMasal Leiv at all, it's not about emotions. It's just about Machshava Div Ma'aseh V'Peil Mamish. Says the Rebbe, any moment we're a balabayis over that. So behem, when it comes to actionable Machshava Div Ma'aseh Habachira, I'm going to say the freedom, the true freedom. Yecheles means possibility, and the Reshus I'm translating as freedom. Nesuna l'chol is given to each person. Laseis uledaber v'lachshav, to do, to speak, and to think. Even if it's against the desires of the heart and the exact opposite of what the heart desires, a person does not have to act on his feelings. Or to say it in Yiddish, we're not animals. We could feel one way and do another. We have that possibility. Animals don't. And it's not easy for some people, by the way, but it's possible. Bechira.
Yes, halev affects the ma'aser.
Right.
We have koyach shalit al halev, but if you don't hold by that, a lot of people can distinguish.
Okay, let's keep reading. The Rebbe is going to speak about Ava Misoteres in this pedic. The tool that allows a person to exercise his freedom, even if his midas are in a different direction, is Ava Misoteres. I don't want to get ahead of myself. So the answer to your question is there is. But it's not that the feeling is overcome by a different feeling. A person is free to not do what his feelings push, and he can do the opposite. And therefore, without dealing with that feeling, he has bechira and yechelis and neshus. No one said it's easy. His bechira and yechelis and neshus in this minute, in these 60 seconds, to be in the madrega mitzvah. I remember I was in yeshiva, and we had a guest speaker. I'm not going to tell you the name. It's not a big deal, but and he told the Bachar B'maise. It wasn't a regular yeshiva. It was a rebellious yeshiva, and the Bachar was so taken by it that the Gemara that says in Shiltis, there was a Yid who was very, very rich, and he was a lowlife, and he had a desire to do a certain aveda, and it was so strong that he was poshet chaylas ava. He was physically in bed. He was sick. That's how big a Baal Taiva he was. I'm not telling you all the details of the story. The nekuda is the Taiva came to him. Ina liyada. He could have done anything he wanted. So somebody said to him, "Hey, look at you. You're shaku and Taivas. You're no tzaddik. You have a moment now, like the Gemara says about the Rebbe Elazar ben Dodaya, yesh keine lome b'shah achas. If you can do anything you want. If you will control yourself and not do this Aveda, what you will achieve in this moment." And he didn't do the Aveda, and in an instant he was not sick anymore. He took a walk. So the Chazal say that Rabbi Akiva saw him, and Rabbi Akiva saw on top of his head a fire. And that's why he was called Nosan Tzutzisa. Because there was a nitzas, there was a fire of David. Mamish a low life. About Taiva, Agrabjung, Agri, Alabailis. And in one instant, in other words, a person doesn't have to act on their emotions necessarily. I remember the Bacham's reaction. They were debating if the story is true, if it could have happened. But this Amaisa Shaitan Svarim, and Shaitan Chazal. It's not Svarim, Shaitan Chazal, Shaitan Chiltas. Weiter. Okay. Kigam b'shosh halev chaymed u'mesavi. Even when the heart desires and lusts. And I always tell you this. The meaning of the word taiva that I think serves the purpose the best is weakness. Taivas weaken a person, like you're buckling at the knees. You don't have koyach to resist. And of course, the worst condition of weakness is a mengitzach noch. If a person is accustomed to letting themselves have what they shouldn't have, so each time they give in, the time later they have less self-control. That's the taich, avenesechem avdilim, the avedes melafafte, and all these other expressions. It takes over the person. Nevertheless, the heart is desiring and weakened by by a physical weakness. Whether it's a permitted taiva or God forbid a prohibited taiva, says the Rebbe Yochel is gaber. You could be stronger than it. And we're not talking about being stronger than the emotion. We're simply talking about controlling the ma'aseh b'peh. And it happens every day. It happens every day. I'm the mikveh yesterday. A boy, I have no idea who he is. Says me, can you watch movies and be a Hasidic Bacher? I asked him his name, because I don't like to talk to strangers. He told me his name. So what am I supposed to tell him? What am I supposed to tell him? No. So what did I accomplish? Yeah, what did I accomplish? I said, listen, movies are a bad thing. You can't kasher them. If you know that they're bad, and you don't want to watch them, and sometimes you give in, you're a Hasidic Shabbat. But if you're going to make the movie kosher, you're not a Hasidic Shabbat. So he thinks. So I say to him, the way you should look at your life is that every day you didn't watch a movie is a victory. And he lit up. He was so happy to hear that. Don't look at yourself, how much of a failure. Look at it the other way around. Every time I don't do the thing that I'm not supposed to do, I'm a Beinani. That's what it is, right? Every time I don't give in to a taiva, I'm a Beinani. Huh? Yochel lehizgabed, a person can be stronger. Ulasiach daite mimena lagamri, to totally distract his mind from it altogether. Not the emotion, but the maiseh. But omrei lalib, he makes a push to cheshbon. This is an aveda. An aveda tar minishton. That's all. An aveda tar minishton. Dvarim hamutarim is ein zach. An aveda tar minishton. But omrei lalibe, a person says to his heart, eineni reitz eliyas rosh. I don't want to be a Rasha, I feel a Shah Achas even for one moment, even though and I'm sure the Eibishter understands, and Taivas I have, but the Aveda I don't want to do, the action I don't want to do. I do not want to be separated and cut off from the Eibishter, B'shum Eifen in any way, for the instant that I'm doing the Aveda. K'diksiv, as the Pasuk says, Avenesechem mavdilim v'goymer. Avedes are a wall between me and the Eibishter. He says, I don't want to be a Rasha. I don't want to be cut off. Later on the page, you're going to have what Emmanuel Shochet calls cardiac Judaism. I'm a Jew at heart. And he used to say, if you put the whole Judaism in the heart, you can have a heart attack. It's too much pressure. You have to spread it out in the whole goof. This is his line. The person says, it's not so terrible. This person makes a cheshbon. I don't want to be a Rasha. I don't want to sin. Because I don't want to become caught up for the Eibishter for one instant. Now let's talk about this. Okay? So I want to share with you a few ideas. I don't think I talked about these things last week, but if I did, I apologize. Okay? The beginning of it is the word for the Malten Rebbe. If I told it to you last week, tell me, because I don't want to waste your time, but I don't think I said it last week. There's a very interesting word for the Malten Rebbe. It's not in the Sichos, as far as I know. But from Chassidim it's brought. And it says in Akdam of Teire Shalom, the Rebbe writes, that when you understand the Ibegegebenkeit, the dedication of Chassidim to their Rabbeim, you understand that what Chassidim Chazer Avot, or write a Hanocha of a Sicha, it's probably reliable, even though Shagiyas Meyav, they're only people. But Kavanosam Retzuya, they so much wanted to be mechaven to what the Rebbe wants, that it's korev lavadai that what they're saying is true and how they're repeating it is true. But this is the story. We all know that Alter Rebbe was in jail. When Alter Rebbe was in jail, it's very, very famous that he was asked 23 questions. Chav Gimel Shailas. And it's unbelievably exciting to see. You can open the Alter Rebbe's Igros Kodesh, the new ones, it's all reprinted and organized in a Seder Mesudah, and you can see the 23 kashas that were written, and the 23 terutzim, Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Tilchav, Gimel. Exactly what we were always told in Teresh Balpeh. They found the original Ksav Yad Kodesh of the Alter Rebbe in a Russian archive. And they were fasim it. The Kisvei Yad are in Russia, but the copies we have. It originally came out, Harav Yeshua Munchan put them in Kerem Chabad. It's 30 years ago. And now it's been Bepirsum. It's an Igros Kodesh. They printed Igros Kodesh. But it's also Yodua that the 23 shilas were prepared. They were written. And the Alter Rebbe answered them b'ksav. There was also a lot of anecdotal. Shmuas, they talked. And this is the Torah Shabbal Peh. In other words, this is not written down. So that's why it becomes a shaila. How reliable is it? It's not in the documents now. You can see the documents. And you could see the similarities to the version of the story that we had always. And you could also see the small mistakes that developed over the years. You're reading the original documents, read Alter Rebbe's own words. And you could see how people, over the generations, distorted a little bit what the Alter Rebbe was saying, as he said it in Tovkuf Nun Tes and Tovkuf Ein Samachalef. But anyway, so one of the anecdotes that they tell is that in addition to the 23 written shilas, there were kama v'kama shilas balpeh, and one of them was this, ubagdoma. You must understand, Alter Rebbe was arrested twice. The first time he was arrested by the Russian government based on a mesida of a person whose name was Hirsch ben Baruch. Ada Yemazeh, we have no idea who he is, Hirsch ben Baruch. they took the Alter Rebbe in just in case. It's not in America, innocent till proven guilty. In Russia, it's guilty till proven innocent. The government asked the questions. So as the Friedrich Rebbe describes it, it looked worse. But it wasn't, the arrest looked very bad. The way it looked, Bechitzonius, was much worse. But the second arrest was much more dangerous. They invited him, they gave him a hotel. He didn't stay in a prison the second time he was in Tanya, yet he had a suite. But the Misnagdim haben zugestellt the Shailes. And it was sakonis. I mean, a word like this and a word like this, wie steht in Chazal? A nekuda, you take away a nekuda, echad becomes acher. You add a nekuda, acher becomes echad. And it's beinei emos machriva and mamish. It was such a sensitive, the question, the Misnagdim's goal was Rahman al-Islam to push Chassidim out of Klal Yisrael. That the government of Russia should officially announce that by law they're a different faith. Rahman al-Islam, hoyoloi sihi. And the Alter Rebbe, of course, did not want that to happen. And the Alter Rebbe was Meisei Nefesh to make sure that this wouldn't happen. And that's the Pada B'Shalom Avsheinu, Veistach. But anyway, so this Avigdor, in the document is called Chaimovich, Ben Chaim. The Alter Rebbe is called Baruchovich, Ben Baruch. They're calling them by the last names. The second arrest, we don't have the Ksav. The second arrest, we have the Russia. The first arrest, we have the original Ksav, Yad Kedesh of the Alter Rebbe. Mamish Kipshute. The second arrest, they have a Russian translation of the questions and the Russian translation of the answers. And we, of course, we know the famous story that they sent them to Vilnius to be Meturgim. The originals are not in that file. So they're calling them as they're written in the documents. So the Alter Rebbe is called Baruchovich, Ben Baruch in Hebrew. And the Avigdor is called Ben Chaim, Chaimovich. So one of the informal questions, which are not in that document, that Chaimovich asked Baruchovich, was that Yadua, that when the Baal Shem Tov would daven, he would say Af, Aleph Pei, Af. And the Misnagdim were tining that the Baal Shem Tov was a dark man, had a shaykhis, as they say in the Shmuas mit Kinder und Jugend, oder in the Cheres from Lubavitcher Rebbe, mit nit gute. This is my childhood, mit nit gute. What's nit gute? It means shadim, dark, the dark side. And that he would say Af to invoke anger, hate, violence. The Baal Shem Tov was associated with koiches of darkness and evil. So it was known. I mean, I wasn't around times of the Baal Shem Tov, but it was known the Baal Shem Tov in Daven for example, Af. And they said to the Alter Rebbe that it's because the Baal Shem Tov was me'edir, not just dinim, but charei, anger, evil, schlechts. So the Alter Rebbe said like this: I could have lied. All I had to do was say that it was an idiosyncrasy. Everybody has mishigasan, you know. One guy does like this, another guy does like this. Everybody, you know, everybody has mishigasan, yeah. So the Kvayochel, we can sagen, as if Azami Niden, the Baal Shem Tov had an idiosyncrasy. Everybody has their, you know. The B'Shmuel was talking chidem. That was his thing. So the Baal Shem Tov, Tanya sagen lahavdol, but the Alter Rebbe said that would have been a lie. Alter Rebbe said that it would have been a lie. If I had said that lie, that would have meant that for ein Rege bin ich gewinn abgerissen von Baal Shem Tov. Alter Rebbe said, for the amount of time it would have taken him Pasha to get those words out. And why is he saying those words? He's saying those words to defend Teiras Shalom Baal Shem Tov, and Avidos Shalom Baal Shem Tov, and Chayev Shalom Baal Shem Tov, and the Messiah of the Baal Shem Tov. But the Alter Rebbe said for the few seconds that he was saying those words about the Baal Shem Tov, which were not true, he would have been separate from the Baal Shem Tov. And the Alter Rebbe said, Ich hab sich nicht gewollt abreißen von Baal Shem Tov, afile farein Rege. I didn't want to be disconnected with him for one instant. Hab ich sich Meisei Nefesh gewesen. Und ich gegeben zu verstehen a Goy. Alter Rebbe said, I had Mesilas Nefesh to explain to a Goy an Inyan Pnimi why the Baal Shem Tov said Af. And it says in some places also the Kavanah. Now, again, the story is famous. The Pshat is less famous. So, did the Pshat taka happen also? I'm telling you what I have read. The first part of the story is written in many places. What I'm about to say is not written in as many places. And Tzadachir, until someone decided that this is Mistama what he said, you understand? That the Baal Shem Tov was in the middle of davening. When in davening, Tormish mafsik sein. No, let interrupt. And the Baal Shem Tov was mechaben in his tefillah. Koif means a monkey. You have in Chazal, kekoif b'bnei Adam, the difference, the disparity between a human being doing an act and a monkey doing an act. And the Baal Shem Tov was saying this in davening as a limud chus, that Yidden today, compared to Yidden earlier, are kekoif b'bnei Adam. Relatively speaking, like monkeys. So the Eibusher should judge us with that kind of kindness and favoritism and gentleness of a Tordich nicht mafsik sein. He's not allowed to say koif or take his octave. So this is the story, and this is the hezber. The story, I think, is true. The hezber is Hashem hezber. Efshes is emes. But what's negate us is the story. That the Alter Rebbe said, for me to have lied, to protect Darkei Shalom Baal Shem Tov, to protect Darkei would have meant that for Ein Rega, I would have been cut off from Baal Shem Tov. I wasn't going to do that. So I had Mesiras Nefesh, the Rebbe said, and I explained to it, Agoy, an Inyan Pnimi. This is what this Beinani says. It's very simple. I don't want to be a Rasha. What is a Rasha? Cut off from Hashem for a Rega. That's it, for a Rega. Kumeisha Kasuv, Avenisechem, Kidiksiv, and it says in the Pasuk, Avenisechem, Avdilim, V'goyme. Now, this I did tell you last week, but I'm repeating it again. You have to understand. Avenisechem, Avdilim, Enechem, and Kechem is a Pasuk in Chumash. Teresh B'ksav, Mikra. In Tanya, this Pasuk is quoted probably without a guzma half a dozen times, or more. It's Kama, it's Perikid. You better, Chasn Yutes, and Chavov, it's in a few places in Tanya, this expression, but it doesn't always mean the same thing. Bichlal, when they quote they mean an emotion. They mean a regesh. What do they mean? That a human being has a certain sensitivity. A certain needs a chush. A ruch needs a chush. And because of the sensitivity, and because of the ruch needs a chush, a yid cannot do an avera. It says in Tanya Perikhes, which we already learned. In Perikhes, in Tanya Perikhes, it says that a Yid's Yetzer Hara is a shade, mishade in Yehudoyin. It's a Jewish demon. The first line of Perikhes. And he says, Taivas Heter, permitted, give me two. Taivas Isser, it's against the Teva of a Yid. At Rebbe Rashab and Kuntus Amayin as a Pashtakasha. If it's against the Teva of a Nefesh HaBahamas of a Yid, to do an Aveda, how come you didn't do Avedas? And he brings the Chayachzal, Ayei Memele Azekach. It's a bisalach. A Yid's Yetzer Hara can't do an Aveda. But if you did an Aveda yesterday, and you haven't done tshuva for that Aveda yet, Aveda Sechem Avdilim. That's how it's normally understood, that yesterday's Aveda, last week's Aveda, last year's Aveda, last decade's Aveda, and I guess by some people, last lifetime's Aveda is a Havdalah between me and my own Elokus. And if I want to regain my chush, my relationship with the Eibishter, I have to do tshuva. So normally, Avenesechem Avdilim is a spiritual thing. A person who has a bad habit can't just say, I'm not doing it anymore. He has to purge himself of the bad habit. That's Avenesechem Avdilim. I have a bad habit. In this inyan, I'm weak. If I am going to conquer that bad habit, I'm going to have to do tshuva. That's what Avenesechem Avdilim is, a regesh. It's an emotional. Here it's pushed to the practical thing. I do Aveda, this second I'm separated. That's it. So the words are the same, but the taich is different. Over here we're talking about Midas HaBeinin and Midas Chaladov, and Alter Rebbe says, I want you to know, Einei Mosel Lev. There's no emotion here. We're not talking about emotion, we're not talking about feelings, we're not talking about the minute before, we're not talking about the minute after, we're talking about now and here and today, in this minute. Midas HaBenyani, Midas Ka'Allah, B'Charei Kol Adam Yimshech, Shabbat B'Bchirasei, U'B'Yacholtei, U'B'Rishusei, they should do what the Eibishter wants and Ma'aseh Dibur Machshava. Why would he care? Eineni Ratzat Liyas Rasha. I don't want to be a Rasha. What's the Taich Rasha? Separate from the Eibishter. For a minute, the minute next, I'm good. Because Avenesechem Avdilim. Pirush. Avenesechem Avdilim doesn't mean the emotional and the spiritual effect, the lasting effect of the Aveda, which in Lashon HaKabbalah is the Pagam B'Nefesh, which you have to correct. It Pashit means the Rega. Over here, the Taich Avenesechem Avdilim means for this second that I'm doing against the Ratzon Elyon, I'm cut off from the Eibishter, like the Alter Rebbe said about him and the Baal Shem Tov. That's a Taich. So what I'm doing is I'm interpreting the words of the Tanya. I'm reading the same thing I read last week. But I'm pointing out little details that last week I didn't do because I wanted to give you a bigger picture. Okay? Rak, rather, I'm continuing to read. Ani roitze ledofka boy. I want to be attached to the Eibishter. In nafshi, ruchi v'nishmasi, my nefesh, ruch and neshama. And of course, I don't know exactly how you explain, but Yehud is holding, quote unquote, sach hakel. In midas habeinin, how we did in Makasha, his nefesh, ruch and neshama, because he's not a spiritual person, he's a maisa person, an action person. Be'eslapshon, as it relates to shleisha levushim yizbarach. We're not talking about Avas Hashem, we're not talking about Yiras Hashem, we're not talking about Yediyas Hashem, we're not talking about Achtas Hashem. We're talking about Beficho, Bovavcha, La Seisen, Shehem. Maise, Dibur, Umachshava. I can do what the Eibishter says, I can stop myself from doing what Hashem says not to do. I can speak what Hashem says to speak, and I cannot speak what Hashem says I should not speak. I could think what Hashem says to think, and I could not think what Hashem doesn't think. B'chaleisa, b'chosha, that's all. B'havaya, and the Eibush, that's Torah mitzvahs. That's it. That's the whole inyan of Midas HaBeinani. He is defining himself by Machshava Dibur Amaisa. There is no Davar Amos Alev whatsoever. That's what we're learning. Okay? Now today's class is really learning. Last week was I'm trying to teach you the Pshat and the Tanya, Limud. Yeah? Okay, questions or comments? I'm going to stop right here, okay? I'm going to finish before 12 o'clock. Tanya usually takes an hour. This is 40 minutes. I'm going to stop. We're going to do better. I'm doing today a Maimed. It's worth sticking around for. Yeah, I didn't finish Friday, but it's not that difficult. It's worth sticking around for. And in Mitzvah Hashem, next week, we're going to continue from right here, okay? Go ahead.
When we learned about
Yeah, Perek Yud, Perek Ches. Heter, right. No, Tavis Heter you can indulge in.
No, that weakens you so that you would get to.
Right, that's what says in Kuntis Mayan.
What?
The Kuntis of Mayan, which is about Shtusim. It's about one word. Shtusim. The whole percentage, it's very interesting Kuntis. Push from an academic perspective, it revolves around the word Shtus. What's meant Shtus? Lamata menasech. So if a person could have a more meaningful life and he chooses a less meaningful life, forget about right and wrong, it's shtus, narish. So the first shtus is taivus. The kuntis goes through a series of taivus. There's the shtus of taivus, there's shtus of shaleya renu adam, machzik tevel atzmei, the whole kuntis is different shtusim. So in the beginning he's talking about the shtus of taivus, and he asks the question, what I told you is from kuntis amayin. I did it today by Havlah, that the Rebbe Rashab asks, if it says in Tanya that a yid does a shade in Yudoin, how does he do an Aveira? So it doesn't say in Tanya, but it says in Kuntis Mayan that it starts from Tavis Heter. Because Tavis Heter, a yid could be Eiver. It's consistent with shade Yehudayin. You have to understand the word Teva. You have to understand the word Teva. Right. To lose your chush. Right. You have to understand, again, you have to understand the word Teva. Teva, in Chassidus, the word Teva is used in two ways. In Perek Yutes and Tanya, Teva is used from a Siddur Nefesh, called Dova, Sheri Bechinas Tam Vadas is called Teva. But that's the unusual. The usual definition of the word Teva is a containment, is a personality. My nature. It's not refined, it's certainly not worked over, it's the way God made me. A Yid's Teva is an Averi Kantu. And the Rebbe says in Basalagani Tashin Yud Gimel that a Goy's Teva is that he cannot be even the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Nech. A goy l'cheira comes from Shorosh Klibas Atmeis Lagamri. Bechlal, it's hard to understand. If a goy comes to Shorosh Klibas Atmeis Lagamri, how do you expect him to be Mekayim Sheva Mitzvahs? The Klipa Alein. But the Rebbe says in that Maimed that it's just like it's Hepech the Teva of a Yid to do an Aveda and Tayag Mitzvahs. It's Hepech the Teva of a goy to be Eva Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Nech. So someone asked the Rebbe, so then how does a goy do it? And the Rebbe said, just like a Yid. Ruach Shtus. It's so interesting. Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break and then